I can never get my stamps centered on die cuts. Every single time they end up crooked or off to one side, and I end up wasting cardstock and die cuts trying over and over to get it straight. It's so frustrating. So I'm going to show you a trick that finally fixed that problem for me. And stick around because I'm going to show you how to use the Crystal 3D gel to create a realistic water effect inside the vases. Now let's get into it. Hi, I'm Jeannie Scott. Welcome to the Upper Craft Room, where we make a mess and create something beautiful out of it. On today's card, we're using the Altenew Bloom with Gray stamp and die set. It comes with 2 vase dies and a coordinating stamp set with botanical images and sentiments. I've used this set a lot, as you can see from the ink on the stamps. This is a simple, clean design that works for so many different occasions. First thing I'm doing is cutting out my dies. So once I have the dies cut out, then I'm going to take the negative pieces from the dies that I have already cut out, and I'm cutting them down so that they fit just around the stamped image. You'll see what I'm talking about here in just a minute. But when I'm cutting these down, I don't want these to be too big, but I want to leave enough around them to where I have enough cardstock to grab a hold of to grab and place my images or my templates rather, where cardstock to grab a hold of, and to be able to place my images where I want them. Once I finish cutting those down, I'm going to grab a scrap piece of paper and I'm laying it on my stamping platform. And now, because these are newer stamps, I'm conditioning the stamp with a stamp conditioning eraser. And I'm using Altenew's Obsidian ink to stamp up my images, and I'm just going to stamp these onto the scrap piece of paper now so that I have something to center the template around to be able to line these dies up. And when I'm stamping with the acrylic block, I always look at the hole at the top of that stamping block and making sure that that is going to help me to align my images correctly every time. Now for the next step, I'm taking those negative templates I cut down and centering them right around the stamped images. And I'm going to use some mint tape to hold these down, but you can use any low-tack tape. It doesn't really matter, anything that you have, as long as it's low-tack and it's not going to rip your paper. Once I have those templates centered around the images, I'm going to place my die cut inside the template. Now that I have my stamps, my die cuts, my templates, and my images all lined up, I'm going to ink up the stamp again, and now I'm going to lay down that ink on top of that die cut. That's going to give me a perfectly centered image. And I want to leave the stamp on the cardstock long enough to make sure I get a nice good transfer of ink. And because that didn't transfer really well, these are newer stamps, so it's going to take a second. I'm going to go ahead and give it another pass, and I'm going to stamp that once again to get that crisp, clean image that I'm going for. And now we have perfectly centered images. That was always so hard for me. I don't think it can get any better than this. Okay, now it's time to start coloring in my images, and I'm going to use Spectrum Noir alcohol markers. For this, you can use any alcohol markers, or you can color this in any way you want. I chose to use alcohol markers. And I'm using citrus green for the leaves, and I'm going to use true blue for the water that's in the vase. And these markers are tri-blends, which means you get 3 shades of the same color on one marker. And I'm starting with the lightest color first. And I'm not worried about how it looks right now because we're going to blend this all out here in just a bit. Once I have that light color down, I'm coming in with the mid-tone shading just in the areas where I want some depth. And I'm laying that darker color at the bottom of the leaves. And I'm not overthinking this. I'm not worrying about the light sources or any of that. I just want the leaves to look as realistic as I can get them without making it complicated. Now I'm going back in with the light color to blend everything out. And watch how that mid-tone softens right into the light. That's what takes it from looking blotchy to looking like it actually has dimension. Light tone, mid-tone, light tone. That's the sequence, and it works every time. And don't forget about your veins and your stems on the leaves. I almost did. And now I'm using the lightest true blue shade to color the water in the vase. And I only use the lightest because I was concerned that this was going to be a little too dark, but it ends up lightening up once it dries, so it was fine. And I think it turned out great. Now I'm adding Crystal 3D gel to the water area inside each vase. This is a water-based gel that dries completely clear with a glass-like finish. The consistency is thick so it doesn't run, and it gives me way more control over placement. I'm using a palette knife to spread it, being careful to stay inside the lines where the water should be. I want it thick enough to get some dimension. It goes on cloudy, but it dries crystal clear in about probably 15 minutes. You can also mix this with re-inkers, alcohol inks, or mica powder, just about any colorant if you want colored or tinted water. But today I'm keeping it clear for a realistic look. And then I decided I needed a grounding layer, so I brought in the Heritage Stencil, and I'm using limestone to ink up just a little bit of the stencil, not doing the whole stencil, just a little bit to add that interest to the card so that the vases don't look like they're just floating in thin air on the card. And this stencil is it's actually such a detailed stencil. It was hard to kind of control, but it looked so good in the end. And look at all that glassy effect. That 3D crystal gel just really turned out well. It really did give me that watery look on the vases that I was going for. It's a very subtle added interest, but it really makes the finished card pop. So now I'm going to go ahead, and even though I stacked this once, I'm going to add another die cut to each one of these so that I can get that dimension. So this has actually got 3 die cuts glued together, and it's going to make a nice thick dimension for me. A nice thick layer on the card so that I can add even more dimension to the card. And here I am scoring my card base at 5.5 by 4.25, and I just score it with the bone folder that comes with the scoreboard, and then I burnish it with the Teflon bone folder so that I don't get that sheen on the card. And then I'm just placing the vases on top just so I can get a feel for what the card's going to look like. And now I am using the stamp wheel to stamp directly onto the card base, not the card base, the grounding layer with the stamp. And I use my die cuts for a guide as to where the placement of the stamp was going to go. And then now I'm inking up with obsidian ink again so that all the ink matches. And I'm using a stamp that says, "Wherever life plants you, bloom with grace." It's a beautiful set, and I thought it was very apropos for what we were creating today. Now I'm positioning the die cut vases on the card base to figure out exactly where I want my sentiment stamped. I want the vases to sit just inside the beginning and the end of the sentiment. And when I add my vases back on top, everything will line up perfectly because I use the actual die cuts to map out the spacing first. Now I'm adding Altenew's pigment ink to the sentiment stamp because I'm going to heat emboss it. One quick tip when you're stamping with the stamp wheel: always keep the hole on the flip plate at the top or in the bottom. It doesn't really matter. Make sure it's in the same position every time, because you're going to know that your stamp is positioned the same way every single time, and you won't accidentally stamp it crooked or upside down and ruin your card. Heat embossing adds another layer of interest to the card. It gives the sentiment a shiny finish, and it also is going to add a little bit of raised dimension, which makes the text stand out more. I'm using clear embossing powder so it stays black but gets that glossy raised look. Once I shake off the excess powder, I'll use my heat tool to melt it and set the embossing. When you're heat embossing, if your card starts to warp, just flip over the cardstock and then heat it from the back side, and that should straighten it out. And now I'm adding adhesive to the grounding layer panel using the Altenew tape runner. Love that tape runner because it gives you time when you lay it down to actually reposition it if you have to before it really adheres to the card. But then once it does, it's stuck down really well. And I'm also making sure that I get enough tape on the corners of the grounding layer panel so that the grounding layer panel's corners stay stuck down to the card base once it does completely adhere to the card. And it's pretty easy to line up. At first I thought I got it wonky, but it looked really good when I picked it up, so I was happy with the placement of that grounding layer. And now I'm adding the die cuts, the vases, to the card. And how I'm lining these up is I'm looking at the sentiment, where it starts and where it begins. So if you look at the parameter of how long that sentiment is, you'll see that I'm putting the vases just inside the beginning and the end. So the first vase is getting lined up to just inside that parameter of the beginning of the stamp, and then the second base is getting set inside the parameter of the end of the sentiment. That was a mouthful, but I did it. And make sure I get that placed properly, and then I'm offsetting the vases. And that finishes our card, but I think it needs a little bit of bling. So I'm going to add a few black sequins around the vases to finish off the card. I'm bringing in the twisty pods where I store my black sequins, and I'm using the Crafter Catcher from Glassboard Studio. These tools are so helpful when adding sequins. They just make things more efficient and keep everything mess-free. I'm using the Altenew Perfect Picker tool to pick up and place each sequence exactly where I want it. This tool makes it so much easier to control placement without using your fingers and getting oils on your card or fumbling with the gems. I'm placing them strategically around the design to add a little sparkle and visual interest without overwhelming the card. I like to place them, move them around until I find a spacing I like, and then glue them down with Gina K's matte glue. This glue dries completely matte, so if you accidentally get a little too much glue on your card, it won't leave that shiny glossy mess that regular glue does. That glossy look is such an eyesore and such a bummer when you've spent so much time making a beautiful card. I'm keeping it simple with just a few sequins because I don't want to take away from the stamped image and the water effect we created with the gel. And there you have it. That stamping trick is going to save you so much time and frustration. Use it every time you want a perfectly centered image. And that gel, even though it's subtle, it makes people stop and look twice at your card. Those little details are what take your cards from good to really good. All the products I used in this video are linked in the description below. And if you want to see another layering technique, check out my video, The Easiest Way to Layer Dies That Look Amazing. I'll link that in the description too. If you're still watching with me today, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me. And if you enjoyed this video and found value in it, give it a like so that YouTube will tell other card makers about it. Subscribe so you never miss a video, and hit the bell so that you get notified every time we put one out. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.